Hello and welcome to another video from Flash Jazz Cat, and I thought in this video, for the sake of posterity apart from anything else, because it's taken that long to do and it's turned out to be such a kind of a unique project, I thought I would take a little look at this 600XL that was sent in from America a couple of weeks ago for a series of upgrades, and describe to you what it's all about, how it turned out, what was done to it, and the little dramas that I encountered along the way. But before we do that, we'll have a little word from the sponsor for today's video. It's Flash Jazz Cat here, and I'm here today to tell you about something wonderful that I've been involved with, and that's PCBWay.com. PCBWay are class-leading specialists in PCB prototyping and fabrication, and they offer a whole range of services aside from that, including CNC machining and 3D printing. So any kind of job that needs doing when it comes to PCB design and manufacture, PCBWay have got you covered. Well, PCBWay recently celebrated their 8th anniversary in this business, so this ain't their first rodeo. You go ahead and tell them that Flash Jazz Cat sent you. You can do that by clicking that there affiliate link below the video. Okay, so what's so special about this Atari 600XL? Well, as you can see, it's had a lot done to it, and I kind of wish I'd recorded the work as I went along, but it did actually take such an enormous amount of time that I would have ended up having to probably edit down about 20 or more hours of footage, which just would have been very difficult to make any kind of narrative from that amount of video. So what I've decided to do, because I want to look at this before it gets sent back to the owner, because there'll be probably one of its kind in the world. If you want similar kind of work to this done on one of your retro computers, doesn't have to be just Ataris, but Ataris is what I'm most familiar with, then you can get in touch if you like with quality of work that you've seen. Now this is an NTSC 600XL board, and as such when it arrived here it had the RF modulator here. It had no monitor jack, it actually had a switch here, a channel switch for the RF modulator, and all of this circuitry pertaining to the actual monitor output, the jack not actually being there, was missing. I'll give you a quick rundown of what the assignment actually was, as we agreed when we spoke before he sent the machine over. So it was Sophia 2, and for those of you who are drooling at the prospect of buying Sophia 2 and wondering where on earth he obtained it, because it's currently unobtainium, he'd bought it a while ago, and I think he just had these parts lying around, so don't go getting all excited thinking that there's a source of Sophia 2's suddenly appeared. So Sophia 2 with DVI output, of course, Ultimate 1MB, the 64K SRAM board from Lotharic, which is a nice quick and easy way to upgrade the 600XL from 16K to 64K, because of course you need to do that modification before you can fit the Ultimate 1MB. And I almost forgot about that, and then he said that he happened to have one of these lying around, and obviously it's a 10-minute job to install it. So there's those three things, and the final component is this here, which was supposed to be a stereo and TK2, that's Transkey, a TK2 board. Transkey, that's probably a bit of a contentious name nowadays.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
But anyway, yeah, a TK2 board, and the owner seemed to be under the impression that it was a stereo board. So he also sent me a, what kind of cartridge was it? The cartridge that has a pokey in it anyway, to salvage the second pokey. Now of course when the stuff arrived here and I looked at this board, which I initially installed upside down, because every single stereo board that I've ever seen, well not stereo board, but every single pokey adapter of any kind that I've ever seen installs with the connectors at the back of the machine. It took me some time to realise that this one installs with the connectors at the front, which makes it a very tight fit under the 600XL keyboard. Anyway, I'll flash up on the screen the actual website and show you what this actually is. Okay, so this is the home page, if you like, for the TK2 Transkey adapter. As you can see, it comes in a few different flavours here. This is at the ataribits.weebly.com website. So this is where a lot of Michael St. Pierre's projects are hosted. So if we go up the top here, you can see we've got TK2, TK2 stereo, TK2 control, and I don't even know what that is. We'll have a little look. Looks like an S drive application for TK2, so probably irrelevant. So what we've got, what I've got is this one, the standard TK2. So I'm assuming it's a piggyback version. I don't know. It's very confusing. I don't know where this board. This board looks nothing like anything that I can see on this page at all. So I'm assuming it came from the Brewing Academy here. I'm sure the customer will be able to confirm this one way or the other. So if we have a look. Now I think what we thought we were going to get was this one, or what the customer thought he'd purchased was this here, which is the TK2 stereo keyboard replacement. So the owner definitely wanted to be able to plug PS2 keyboards into the back of the machine. So we got this dual adapter here. So we got this, which was fully expected, but we didn't get this. What I think we actually got was, if we can find it, this, but it doesn't look like this. It looks completely different. Now you can see this one seems to have the connectors thrown out towards the back of the machine, which is far more what I would expect. Makes a lot more sense. It's even got low profile headers on it. But yet this one that we've got here in the 600XL has the connectors over the front. So I don't know if this is very old stock. Perhaps the owner simply purchased it a long time ago. But this here would be far, far preferable to what we actually ended up with. But having said that, what he actually thought he had was the stereo board, which, as you can see, is a lot busier. And this is the TK2 keyboard interface on a PIC controller here, microcontroller, and then obviously it's got a stereo amplifier as well. So we had a bit of a problem on our hands here anyway, because not that stereo was the lack of stereo was an absolute deal breaker for the customer, because he can always add that later on. So since the owner's going to want to take DVI video from this connector here, he's also going to need some way of getting the audio out of the machine, because there's no audio on the DVI connector. And what I normally do is the convenience, you could take it from the legacy monitor jack, but what I normally do as a convenience is to just put a 3.5mm headphone style jack somewhere on the motherboard. Well, of course, since the customer already wanted the dual PS2 connectors, and this adapter board came with a 3.5-inch stereo jack attached to it, well, what could be better? That kills two birds with one stone. I don't have to mount a 3.5mm audio jack somewhere else on the board. So what I didn't realise in my, highly stressed out and fatigued state that I've been in lately, with all the brain fog attendant to it, is that, of course, this is the stereo schematic for the stereo TK2 board. And as you can see here, on pin 2 we've got right audio out, and on pin 9 we've got left audio out. And that, of course, is coming from the stereo amplifiers here. Now, of course, this mono version of the TK2 board we have here, not only does it not have an audio amp, which you would expect to see if it was going to feed audio straight from the pokey pin 37 audio out, but it didn't even have these two wired up at all. And obviously the reason for that, when you actually think about it, is that there's no particular point most of the time in feeding out amplified mono audio. And on the daughter board at the back of the machine here, so these would be the two pins. I think that one's right audio. I think that's left audio, and I think that's right audio. So this is connected with a ribbon cable that goes all the way down to the 10-pin header on the TK2 board. And ironically, when I've had to alter this board, which I've had to do quite dramatically here, to get it to sit above the SIO connector, because I absolutely refuse to put screws going straight through right angle brackets in the back of the machine. I refuse to do that. So what I wanted to do was brace the thing using some screws coming through the strain relief holes in the SIO connector. Now this board wasn't designed to do that. The holes were spaced in a completely arbitrary fashion without any care to whether or not they lined up with the SIO connector underneath, which is a bit of a shame. It would be a nice idea to design this board so that the holes, rather than me having to route them out like this, were of the correct pitch, so that you could actually use to do exactly what I've done here and mount this board on long standoffs directly above the SIO connector without having to do all these alterations. So in the course of altering this board, of course, I had to cut through 2 traces, and funnily enough it was the left and right audio traces, which I patched. But at the time it was a waste of time patching these things, because I didn't realise, in my stupidity of course, that they weren't even wired up to the main board. But what I have done, just in case the customer at a later date does decide to buy the stereo version of the TK2 board, is I've made a little harness here with the 3 extra signals, which is the GTI, Bell, A4 address line, and the MO signal, which goes straight to the ultimate 1 megabyte here. So what the customer can actually do is disconnect this, which is the connection to the 4 console keys, so that the external keyboard can control to provide console key input. You can take this board out, put the stereo board in, make all the same connections. I'm assuming the connectors will be around the back, so we might have to rotate these ribbon cables a bit. He can come along later on and swap that board out, and hopefully what you'll then get is left and right stereo audio coming out of this 3.5-inch jack here. Now in the short term that leaves us with the problem of not having any audio out of this jack, because there's no stereo board here. The only thing that's coming through this ribbon cable here is the signals for the dual PS2 keyboard connection. So what I've done as well is I've taken audio from up here, move the camera along a bit. So I've added a push fit connector to the audio out for the standard monitor jack, which you can plug or unplug here. And I've run that all the way along here to the adapter board, and I've just soldered a jumper between the left and right audio pins, and then connected the left side to audio out. So now he's got audio out coming through and going out of the 3.5-inch jack, but you can disconnect this wire when he wants to, if he needs to put the stereo board in, and have stereo out with no further soldering or anything whatsoever. So it all should just be totally compatible, but he is completely tied up now in this Atari Bits MyTech TK2 because of the alterations that we had to do at the back of the machine. And while we're on the subject of the TK2, and I did encounter this in the past when I did fit a stereo TK2 controller in an Atari 800XL and discovered that the internal keyboard no longer worked, is that these devices ship with they ship in XEGS mode for some reason. I did discuss this with Michael before, and he did kind of concede that it probably wasn't the best idea, but they ship in XEGS mode, which means the internal keyboard does not work after this is fitted. I think you press Ctrl Alt and X on the PS2 keyboard in order to take it out of XEGS mode, and it stays out of XEGS mode thereafter until you set it again. But it's quite confusing, and I'd forgotten what the solution was to this, as to why the internal keyboard didn't work. So I ended up Googling around, and I ended up on the ABUK forum, a German Atari forum, where Jürgen TFHH had replied to somebody who'd had exactly the same problem about 2 years ago. I'd forgotten what the solution was, but thanks to Jürgen and his forum post, there was the solution. The instructions will be buried in the TK2 manual somewhere, or maybe even on the product page. I haven't checked. I do know that it is written down somewhere, but the problem is that the new installer, knowing that we don't read these things, and I'm probably no exception to that, puts the board in the machine and then finds that the internal keyboard won't work unless you take the TK2 out, and either forgets or didn't realise that the device ships in XEGS mode. Now, this wasn't the end of the keyboard story on this machine. No. By no means was it the end. So, kind of jumping ahead with the audio issues. Now, the other problem we had with this machine was actually the keyboard. Now you see the machine in its post-restoration state. It had corrosion on the console keys and the cartridge doors and whatnot. It's a little bit corroded on the badge, but not much I can do about that. Now, the keyboard is a metal plate backed keyboard. I think it's a high-tech, possibly. I can't remember the brand name offhand anyway. But it has the square profile switches inside of it. I'm going to pop a key off to show you. I don't really want to start taking the whole thing apart again. No, I can't. But it's got the little square plastic profile plunger, plastic chassis, and every key has a spring drop down hole. So if you take the keyboard apart the right way up, all the springs fall out. So you have to take it apart upside down to get at the mylar, which is underneath. Now this mylar here, if you could have seen it beforehand, well, as you can see, it's now very short for a start, and this was quite nastily corroded here. It was a little bit longer, and it was folded back on itself as well, and the ends of the traces here were absolutely chewed away by how tightly it had been forced into the keyboard connector. So it wasn't going to be enough to just repaint the ends. I had to actually chop off, because when I pulled the keyboard flex cable out of the connector, at one point it actually dragged a pin out of the edge connector on the motherboard. I was able to insert it again. So anyway, the chief problem with this keyboard, there was two whole columns of keys that didn't work. It was this one here, and I think that one there, because you couldn't go, you couldn't cursor down, you could only cursor up. So there was two obvious problem lines. So the first thing I did, I took the keyboard apart, completely stripped it down, fixed the traces, chopped the mangled end off the flex cable, painted all the corroded traces. So I've completely serviced the mylar, repaired all the burnt and broken traces, shortened this keyboard cable, repaired any problems there, checked for continuity on the multi-tester, tried the keyboard again, and we still had the same problem. So I tried a spare keyboard, and that had the same problem with non-functional rows. So it wasn't the keyboard from that point. It was still worth servicing the keyboard, but the keyboard wasn't obviously the primary source of the issue, so it was somewhere on the board. So back we go to the board itself. I changed the two CD51 chips here, which are directly connected to the keyboard matrix. That didn't help. I tried a different pokey chip. That didn't help the situation. So the chief suspect after this was the actual keyboard connector. Even though I pinged out the connections and it seemed okay, we had already had that pin sort of dragged out of the connector and pushed back in. Although I think it was a different line. Unfortunately, I bought a load of these from Conrad in Germany a couple of years ago, and there seems to be a resurgence of interest in them now. There's a couple of people wanting to buy these things from me because Conrad's ran out, but I only have a finite supply, and I don't propose to sell all of them. But after I bought these things, I never needed them. I needed them all the time before I bought some, but since I bought them, I never needed them, until now anyway. So I thought I'll replace this edge connector. And so I desoldered the back of it, and I used the hot air to just help it out the hole a bit. And when I put the hot air back in the cradle at the corner here, the keyboard mylar was at the back of the desk, and it singed the end of the edge connector again, so I had to trim a little bit more off. So that's why it's so short now. But there was stuff all over the desk here. It was just getting... I was completely exasperated by this point, but anyway, it still works. So when I put this new connector in anyway, suddenly all the keys worked. So it was the damn connector. There was two separate points of failure on this connector. So that was the keyboard fixed anyway. So we cleaned everything up. We got a working keyboard. We have a working keyboard whether or not there's PS2 keyboards attached at the back. Of course, the PS2 keyboards do work. Right, so that's the mechanical side of the build. So basically, as you can see, we've got the TK2 supported on these standoffs here. There wasn't actually room for a... Well, there was room on that one for a plastic standoff, but I've just used a nut there to position the height. So that's wedged on there on the top of the SIO connector, right next to the Ultimate 1 megabyte, which is attached to the board with standoffs as well. And as you can see, it's an unbelievably tight fit. And down here at the corner, there's a screw pillar on the top half of the case, which I had to mill out a little bit in the corner there. But the good thing about that is that offers additional bracing for this contraption here, so that when you're plugging your PS2 keyboards in and out, it can't actually move backwards because the screw pillar is wedged in there. So that's pretty good. So yeah, so it looks like I need to redo these connections and make them a little bit longer, just in case the owner wants to put the stereo board in at a later date and that cable won't do the stretch right across there. And will that really be the final thing? And of course, the other thing I didn't go into too much yet, if we have a look over this side of the board, now I have a dead and really beyond salvage, because I was messing on with it years and years ago when I really didn't know what I was doing, and I broke a load of traces on the board. So a dead 600XL motherboard, which I'm just now using as a parts donor basically. So what I was able to do here is populate this missing section. Of course, this being an NTSC machine, I was able to populate this missing section of video circuit with parts largely salvaged from the donor machine. That was a nice simple process. You can just take them off with hot air. After clearing the holes here, take them off the donor with a hot air and just drop them in here. So we completed the video circuit. This doesn't need the color burst, the PAL color burst stuff, of course, because this is an NTSC machine. And then I was able to install the DIN5 monitor jack there after removing the channel switch. So there are the VS for the channel switch down there that was removed. But under that channel switch, if you have a 600XL with no monitor jack, the footprint for the DIN5 connector is under the channel switch. All you have to do is take the channel switch out, take the RF modulator out as well if you want, take that channel switch out, clear these holes, and the DIN5 connector drops straight in. No need to start faffing about with custom S-video connectors or something that sits behind the hole for the RF modulator. That's assuming you're confident enough to cut a hole for this connector, of course, which I'll get to in a minute. And here we've got our chroma and luma connections, of course, that aren't present out of the factory. And at the end of that, we basically get an NTSC 600XL with S-video and composite video output, which is something that didn't really exist as far as I'm aware out of the factory, because the NTSC machines never had a monitor jack attached. But they do have all the traces that you need to put one in. So we've got legacy video now, and we've got the DVI connector, which of course helpfully arrives with suitable vias for standoffs. Soldering standoffs there, so the board is solidly attached to the motherboard. So that's pretty much the internal mechanical and electronic side of it. But of course we've got the external side of it as well, and this was quite a time-consuming process as well, because of course we had to cut some holes for all this fancy stuff at the back. Okay, so the back of the machine, obviously here I had to cut. This is where the slot used to be for the channel switch. Fortunately, the slot just fell within the lower hemisphere of a hole for the DIN5 monitor jack. So that's what I've cut here, a nice hole for the monitor jack. And of course we also needed a rectangular hole for the DVI connector, so I added that as well. Now if we move out of this end of the machine, things get a whole lot more complicated, because of course we have the two PS2 connectors and the stereo jack, which are directly above the SIO connector. So I had to do a lot of measurements here and very carefully drill these out with a step drill and finish them with a file. And even if we put the top of the case on, to do some work on the top of the case as well, just to make sure that when everything's plugged in, there's just sufficient clearance for an actual PS2 connector. Bearing in mind I had to mount this board upside down, of course, because if you rotate it back round the other way, these holes have zero chance of being useful at all on the 600XL. and the stereo jack would have been way out off the end of the case. So this is upside down, so the PS2 connectors go in the back of the machine upside down as well. So that was quite the job in itself. So we pop the board into the case anyway, just to give you an idea of what it actually looks like when it's put together. Right, so as you can see now, I've screwed the case together. It looks quite smart, and you can see on the back we've got our PS2 connectors there, and we've got the DVI connector and the legacy monitor port, all present and correct. And I think it looks very nice indeed. So let's plug it in and show you as well some of the niceties of operation. So here we are, the machine is now screwed back together nice and solid. It all fits somehow, despite the fact that the connections for that TK2 board are right at the front of the case underneath the keyboard, so I think we're quite lucky there. As part of this job, I refinished the aluminium trim, which was all corroded, and cleaned the case thoroughly, all looking pretty much factory fresh. Now, one problem of course with the positioning of these PS2 connectors is that the ubiquitous Fujinet, which I just never ever tire of hearing about, won't fit into the back of the machine when the connectors are in. So I think he's going to get some sort of extension cable here. There was no sane place other than that I could think of to put these connectors. It's, in fact, I think it's a very sensible place to put them, Fujinet notwithstanding. You could, I mean, there's no way to put PS2 connectors up at this end of the board. There's probably room for a stereo connector, but we've got the cartridge bay directly behind here. We've got the parallel bus and Ultimate 1 megabyte directly behind here. So there's really nowhere else to put them unless we're going to get really janky and start putting them on the side and stuff like that. So, but this all raises a very interesting ethical discussion, of course, concerning drilling holes in cases and such like. Would I do this to a 600XL that I owned? Probably not. Mainly because I don't really have any need to use external keyboards with these machines. Nice though it is, I mean, as far as space is concerned, and it's always a big concern here, the 600XL is my favourite personally, because it's so small and compact. It fits very nicely on the desk here. I've got loads of space, as I've always got cables and tools and things all over the place. I've got a little bit of room over to the left here, but not very much. So this machine on its own with its integral keyboard is a very, very nice 8-bit machine, and it's the one I use pretty much day to day for testing and development and all that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't be inclined to put holes in the back for a PS2 connection. Sophia, that's fine. I'm very, very lucky that I've got a display device here which will handle 15 kilohertz RGB over SCART. So most of my machines have got VBXE in them. So the worst, if you like, if you object to this kind of thing, the worst I'll do is have another circular hole here instead of this oblong shape for a DIN 13 connector, and that's where stereo will come out as well. So that's about as far as I'll go, just because it's as far as I need to go with these modifications. But I don't know what you think. Everybody's opinion differs on this sort of thing. Now, it's not up to me to tell the owner whether or not he can have PS2 connectors in the back of his machine. It's his Atari. It's up to him what he wants to do with it. Now, the way I look at it is that if I don't do this work and perform these modifications, and the owner actually admitted this himself, he would have tried to do it himself, and he would have made a bodge of it and probably made a horrible mess trying to put these connections in the back of the machine. So it then comes down to, it's going to get done, the job's going to get done one way or another, and it's a choice between, is it going to get done and look pretty nice, or is it going to get done and look like hell? So I would rather, if the job's going to get done, that it gets done and looks good. So you can say, well, that's horrible, I don't like the positioning of where they are, I wouldn't do this to an Atari, but at the end of the day, it was going to get done. And what I would like to see is that it gets done and it looks as good as it can. And I think it does look as good as it can. So that's my position on the matter. I'm not endorsing these kinds of modifications, but I will do them on the basis that if it's going to get done anyway and the owner's determined to modify the machine like this, then I can make it look reasonably nice. And it's on the back of the case, and the machine, to all intents and purposes from the front, looks like a 600 XL out of the factory. So I'm pleased with how it turned out, but it took a hell of a long time, and all kinds of unexpected issues along the way with the keyboard and the thinking that we had a stereo board when we didn't have a stereo board and that sort of stuff. But it's done now, so I'm going to plug it in, quickly show you how it works. So this is S-video-out from the legacy monitor jack, using the video circuit that didn't exist beforehand. It doesn't look too bad at all if we pop into the firmware setup menu. It's quite nice. It's got a little bit of fringing and a little bit of artifacting on there. Maybe I could tweak the circuit a little bit, but I mean it's fine. He's not going to use this anyway, but I wanted to put it in there for completeness. Since we were going to take the RF modulator out anyway, there seemed to be absolutely no point in leaving a redundant channel switch in the back of the machine. So when he needs legacy video, he's got it there. So let's now have a look at the DVI video output. So if you can hear that, we do get audio, and this is from the 3.5mm headphone jack at the back of the machine here. So if we go into the firmware setup menu now, you probably can't tell from the camera, but it does look significantly nicer. It's very, very crisp. Now what we've got here, and I debugged this as well. I'm going to release this firmware shortly. It's not vastly different from what we had during last year's release, but I have finally fixed the Sophia plugin, which did have a bug which kind of sent it off into the weeds for some seconds at a time, resulting in sometimes when you went into the setup menu it would take some seconds, you'd just be staring at a black screen. And one poor user reported a behaviour to me by email about 3 years ago, I think, which I just didn't believe. I couldn't see how it could actually happen. But my apologies if you're watching this video. I did manage to reproduce exactly what you said at one point, and it did make perfect sense. It was just me being a little bit pig-headed and not really understanding how the code path could end up going where it did. So it was a very simple fix actually, but very effective. So that problem has been resolved. So I'll release this fairly shortly, and if you do have Ultimate 1MB and Sophia 2, you can of course change the resolution of the display to suit yourself. It tests it, testing new resolution, and if it doesn't work out, or if you don't get a picture, if you just leave it alone for a minute, it there you go, it returns to where it was before. So the user can set the DVI resolution the way he wants it. Now this is very useful because when I first plugged this into this monitor, possibly with this being an NTSC machine as well, it was about putting out 60 frames rather than 50 a second. This monitor could not lock on to the DVI signal at all. So since we've got the legacy video, I was able to set the Sophia resolution via the S-video signal so I could see what I was doing. And then when I switched over to the DVI signal with a revised resolution, different resolution, it worked. So there we go. So we've got the latest firmware and plugin. As I say, there's not a great deal other than that changed since last time. I've got it set up for side 3 operation at the moment. Whether or not the owner's going to get a side 3 or not, I'll ask him before I commit to sending this version off. Firmware off to him, so everything works nicely. So when we boot the machine, we get sounds. And of course, we can plug in a PS2 keyboard, which I'll do now. Remembering this have to go in upside down. Okay, so once it's plugged in, you just wait a couple of seconds. So if you're not plugging it in hot, of course, normally you'd have the thing plugged in beforehand, but this is a PS2 keyboard. There we go, so that all works, and the internal keyboard finally works as well, and all the keys have been tested and everything works great. So hopefully if this if the owner can get the SIO extension cable that he was after, he's going to be absolutely delighted with this, and at any future time that he wants to that he has a hankering for stereo audio, he can put that stereo board in, if you can buy one from the Brewing Academy that fits the bill and has the same pin out to the harness that I've made from him, and he can just swap them over on his own without having to do any soldering. So I hope you found that one interesting. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. This is what I do, so if you want any upgrades installing in an Atari 8-bit computer particularly, or I have worked on others as well. I've worked on Commodore machines, Dragon 32, I did some work on one of those, Atari STs, Commodore Amigas, all that sort of stuff. This is what I do. So if you've got a very complicated build as this one turned out to be, and you don't feel like you can tackle it yourself, and it involves a lot of complicated modifications like that, this is what I specialise in. And as I say, I'm not here to tell you whether or not you should do these things to your Atari computer. I'm just here to facilitate what you want to do. And I need to thank a couple of new patrons in this video who signed up to Patreon. I haven't even had time to write you a personal message to thank you for signing up, which I'll do that as soon as I possibly can. And you'll see the list anyway on the screen as I'm talking of the current patrons and new patrons. Very, very much appreciated indeed. So I really appreciate that support, especially since the content output on this channel continues to be sporadic and erratic. I'm trying as hard as I can, but 3 weeks ago I received the invoice for my recently deceased mother's full-time residential care, which I had no problem about at all. I was fully expecting that, but it did write me a letter saying that they had completed a financial assessment on my mother, and that was the basis for the invoiced amount, which was, I knew, to be completely untrue because no financial assessment had been carried out. I didn't actually think one was necessary, but nevertheless they wrote to me saying one had been carried out and hadn't. So I took them to task over that, and I had to wait 2 weeks before I got a reply to that. And I only got a reply because I actually chased it up with the finance department. So there was lots of phone calls and lots of emails, and I'm still waiting for, having paid the invoice finally for £12,500, I'm still waiting for them to provide the requested receipt and confirmation of receipt of the money and that the account's been closed. But that's just about the level of service and competence I would expect from the local council now. And meanwhile, of course, I've still got the solicitor trying to source the deeds to the property that's been left behind. Anyway, 1,000,001 things to worry about, but I'm sure it'll get easier as time goes on. But as ever, thank you for your understanding and thank you for your patience. It's not because I don't like making videos or can't be bothered to make videos, it's just it does get a little bit overwhelming at times, especially when I get a machine like this that just became an absolute time drain, a complete nightmare, that was supposed to take about 4, 5, 6 hours to put together and probably ended up taking about 3 times that before I actually got it finished. But anyway, I'm happy with how it turned out, and I hope the owner's going to be happy with it as well. Maybe in the next video, hopefully I've got lined up, I've got absolutely no shortage of content to make as far as ideas for videos are concerned. I've still got that box of stuff from Candle. I want to have a look at his video upgrade that he designed, and the VBXE carrier board that we looked at before, which coincidentally, the design for that, you'll find that on the community section at PCBWay, who of course are the sponsor for the video. And yeah, so lots of ideas, lots to do. Thank you again for your support, and with that I'll bring it to a close, and I'll see you in the next video. We hopefully won't be too far away, and until then, bye bye for now.